In the middle of the stormy rain, which seemed to have been preparing to pour all its accumulated anger onto the earth since the morning, a tragedy occurred, the echoes of which spread throughout the kingdom. Gabriella's carriage, famous for her villainous deeds, failed the test of the elements and crashed like a fragile nut under the weight of inexorable fate. At that fatal moment, Ernst Cassel Eckes, Duke of the North, known for his indomitable will and courage, was near the scene, which at that moment was put to the severest test. Ernst, with a heart capable of loving despite all obstacles, could not bear the thought of losing his beloved Gabriella. His voice, filled with despair and bitterness, was torn apart, trying to break through the noise of the rain as he screamed, calling to the heavens for mercy. Tears mingling with raindrops streamed down his face, creating the illusion of a double downpour, carrying the fullness of his desperation and unyielding determination. "I can't lose her!" His words cut through the air like a sword, but even such willpower was powerless in the face of fate. Ernst, being the Duke of the North and husband of the holy evildoer, knew of her wrongdoings, but the love he had for her made him turn a blind eye to all wrongdoings, immersing him in a world where he was willing to fight the entire world for his love. This story of great love, confronting not only social norms but also fate itself, absorbed him completely. Two feelings fought in his heart: boundless love, which allowed him to see Gabrielle not only as a villain, but as the woman he loved, and despair at the realization that sometimes even the strongest feelings could not change the course of events. At this moment, Ernst Cassel X was not just the Duke of the North, he was a man facing the inevitable, trying to stop time and fate with his will. In a world where characters' fates are predetermined by the pages of novels, Gabriella has found herself in the guise of a villainess. Her life path was not easy. Born outside the light of legal marriage, she lived like an angel, shrouded in an aura of unfathomable beauty and goodness. But her fate was predetermined to an ominous end, to die at the hands of others. It was a cruel reminder that in the world of romance novels, it is rare that anyone is able to get out of the shadows of ink and paper to change their lot. However, a twist of fate has given Gabriella a chance at redemption and a new life. The memory of a notice from the author, as if a messenger from another world, brought news of a future project, a sequel novel where Ernst, Duke of the North, will become the husband of the main character. Gabriella, illuminated by a momentary insight and the realization that her destiny was not yet complete, decided that she should be the one to become this heroine. It was her opportunity to break free from the captivity of a plot that seemed hopeless, and to bring to life a world in which she could find happiness and love despite all the obstacles. With that decision in her heart, Gabriella stepped into the unknown, armed only with her will to live and the hope that she could rewrite her future. She imagined herself by Ernst's side, sharing joys and sorrows with him, going through trials hand in hand. In her imagination, she no longer saw herself as a villain doomed to loneliness and grief, but as a loving wife and faithful companion, ready to face any challenge for the sake of common happiness. It was her act of courage and desperate hope, a soul's cry for the right to a second chance and for a dream that could perhaps become a reality. In the dark tangle of events that unfolded in the lives of Gabriella and Ernst, a guard, like a messenger of fate, brought before the Duke's face the perpetrator of the damage to the carriage. That one had the banner of the power of the day, a symbol that carried power and authority, but also betrayal and conspiracy. A terrible truth was revealed. None other than the first prince, a member of the royal family itself, was behind the attempt on Gabriella's life, bringing a black accent to the already tangled tale of two hearts. Ernst, Duke of the North, in response to this betrayal, filled with furious rage and resentment, swears ruthless vengeance. His words, determined to chop off every limb of the guilty, sounded like a sentence, promising imminent retribution for bloodshed and betrayal. This vow becomes a vivid reflection of his deep feelings for Gabriella, showing that even a sham marriage could not become a barrier to sincere emotions. Gabriella, despite the formality of their union, found something in this marriage that made her heart beat faster. She was genuinely happy about the union, valued it, even keeping Ernst's family heirloom, a symbol of his lineage and his personal history. This gesture was her way of expressing her respect and affection for her husband, despite all the hardships and trials they went through. In trying to confess her true feelings to Ernst, Gabriella found herself on the edge of her strength. Her words, filled with love and despair, were meant to reveal her true heart to Ernst, to show him that her feelings were deeper than they seemed at first glance. However, at this critical moment, when she was ready to open her soul, the last of her strength left her, as if fate itself decided to add another test to their already difficult history. Gabriella, heavy in her heart, turned to Ernst, putting the last spark of hope into her words. She expressed her deepest desire to meet him again, but in another life, thus emphasizing the inevitability of their separation in this world. The words were full of hidden longing and elusive hope, as if each letter carried a piece of her soul. And then, in the next instant, fate presented Gabriella with an entirely different challenge. She woke up in a space where the grandeur and power of the hall racked her mind with excitement and bewilderment. Before her stood the Lord of the Great Hall, the embodiment of power and mystery, and all around her a gathering unseen before, where the forces of day and night, the opposites of nature itself, found common ground sitting at the same table. The sight made her heart sink with amazement, and questions filled her thoughts, for she had no idea why death had bypassed her, or what power had caused this incredible union. Silence hung tensely in the air until the Lord's voice rang out, pervading the space with its undeniable importance. With an ease only reserved for those accustomed to deciding the fate of worlds, he revealed the purpose of this unusual gathering. The words about the upcoming wedding of Ernst and the princess froze in the air like an invisible blow to Gabriella's heart. The announcement signaled to her a new round of events in which every breath and glance took on new meaning. Behind these words was a story that could change not only their fates, but the fates of entire worlds, bound together by invisible threads of decisions and choices. At that moment, Gabriella felt the weight of the coming ordeal on her shoulders, and her heart was determined to face it head-on, no matter what secrets and discoveries she might find along the way. As the magical gathering of the forces of day and night around the Lord of the Great Hall seemed to reach its climax, Gabriella felt an unexpected twist in her fortunes. A sudden realization like a bolt of lightning flashed through her mind, revealing the truth hidden from her view until that moment. She had, without realizing it, already taken the place of Princess Fiona Isodium, a name that was now implicated in her essence. This fact carried with it weighty consequences and new obligations, the first of which was the signing of a contract symbolizing her return to life and, at the same time, marriage. Ernst appeared before Gabriella again, his figure shrouded in an aura of gloom and impregnability even thicker than ever before. In an attempt to find some way to his heart, she turned to him, hoping to break down the silent wall erected between them. But Ernst, like a rock, unwavering and cold, only turned away, unwilling to share his thoughts or feelings. The silence was heavy, a desperate note of separation, invisible but palpable in every look and gesture. When Ernst, with an unknowable feeling, signed the contract, the gesture was a turning point in their history. Gabriella looked into the document and discovered a surprising detail. It had been 6 years since her death. Time seemed to stop for her, and the world continued its rotation, hiding a new reality under a cloak of mystery and change. With this momentary but eternal in its meaning signature, she regained her status as Ernst's wife, entering into a bond shrouded in the mysticism of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Thus, standing opposite each other, they were at once close and unreachably distant, bound and separated by their destinies, burdened by the secrets of the past and the unknown trials that the future prepared for them. In that moment, filled with silence and unspoken words, was the essence of their complex relationship, a maze of feelings and commitments in which each of them was searching for their way. At one point, when the world seemed quiet and still, an inner conflict flared in Gabriella's heart, a vein of doubts and desires that twisted between past and present, creating a bridge between two lives. She stood on the threshold of a decision that could change everything around her and within herself. Her mind reached for Ernst, for his deep eyes, full of secrets and unread pages of their shared history, but the words froze on her lips, unwilling to turn into sounds. Even when she tried to capture her thoughts on paper, her hand refused to obey, as if an inner guardian had imprinted her true self inside, preventing the world from knowing the truth. Thus, Gabriella was forced to continue playing the role of Princess Fiona, whose name carried the weight of the past, echoes of long ago battles and confrontations, for the kingdom was divided into two warring sides. The powers of the day, representing the prosperous and bountiful South where prosperity and peace seemed eternal, and the forces of night emanating from the desolate and harsh North, where life required patience and endurance. These two elements continually battled for hegemony and power, embodying the eternal conflict of light and darkness. In this divided world, Ernst was like a son of the night, mysterious and powerful, a representative of the side to which Fiona belonged only in heritage, but not in spirit. In the depths of her soul, Gabriella, living in a new guise, was always searching for an answer to the question of why fate had brought her and Ernst together, why their souls had found each other in this confrontation of worlds and times. The union of Fiona and Gabriella seemed something unthinkable and at the same time destined by fate, a bridge spanning the abyss of centuries-old feuds, a symbol of the possible unity and reconciliation of two worlds, two opposing forces striving for harmony in the hearts of two lovers. Watching Ernst, Gabriella could read his face like an open book whose pages held the secrets of his soul. There was a lack of joy in his gaze, a heavy shadow of doubt and indecision weighing on his heart. In this restless sea of emotions, Gabriella tried to catch the familiar ripples of the past, the spark in his eyes that could confirm that their souls were connected not only in the present, but also in the memories of a past life. Her heart languished in the hope that despite the separation, Ernst found comfort in the simple pleasures of life, such as eating well. At that moment, reality invaded her train of thought as suddenly as a thunderclap. The maid, who had burst in with an unexpected announcement, had shattered the peace. Her words about Gabriella being too thin and needing to have her waist remeasured sounded not just like a breach of etiquette, but rude, inappropriate for a maid. But in Gabriella's heart, where Fiona's memories resided, it was not surprising. She remembered how even in the past, as a princess, she had been mocked and bullied, a bitter part of her heritage. At this point, Gabriella made the decision to ignore the maid's rudeness, deciding that sometimes wisdom lay in the ability to show leniency and patience, even when it seemed difficult. It was a testament to her inner strength and confidence, a legacy Fiona carried in her heart. Gabriella realized that every moment of her life, every trial only tempered her spirit, preparing her for the upcoming trials and choices that could determine the fate not only of herself, but of the entire kingdom. In the shadows of an ancient castle, where secrets and intrigue weave like a spider's web, hidden from prying eyes, Gabriella has been drawn into a dangerous game of thrones. Her wit and cunning, wrapped in a sheath of innocence and carelessness, became her shield and sword in this struggle for survival. She was well aware that her predecessor, Fiona, had escaped her fatal fate precisely because of her insignificance and lack of ambition that might have threatened members of her powerful family. Such a person posed no threat and therefore could continue to exist while remaining in the shadows of great events and deadly games. As she accepted her new body and her new role, Gabriella realized that she would have to master the art of disguise to fool everyone around her. Her behavior had to be a flawless piece of acting, in which every gesture and word aimed at maintaining the image of a disinterested and simple-minded girl whose only concerns seemed petty and innocent. Suddenly, on a subtle morning, as the castle slowly awoke from the night shadows, Gabriella was confronted with the insolence of one of the maids. With undisguised impudence, the girl decided to replace the pearls on the wedding dress, which was supposed to be the embodiment of purity and grandeur of the upcoming celebration. Gabriella, noticing the forgery, immediately sprang into action, addressing the maid with an accusation that would have made even the bravest man tremble. Her words that she intended to execute the culprit within the hour sounded so chilling that it instantly caused consternation in the maid's eyes. But suddenly, in this moment of tension and fear, Gabriella allowed herself to laugh. Her laughter, full of irony and slyness, instantly dispelled the atmosphere of fear, creating an illusion of mercy and unpredictability. With a request to pull her dress tighter, she suddenly declared a desire to show it off to her brother, as if suggesting a new game of fate. The maid, realizing the consequences of such an action, began to panic and beg Gabriella to abandon her intention, for she knew very well that Gabriella's brother was not as frivolous and unpredictable. His gaze was quick and perceptive, and he would immediately uncover the slightest lie, which could have unpredictable and possibly disastrous consequences. As this tense scene continues, Gabriella, with unquestionable authority and control over the situation, put the maid in front of a choice that could change her fate. The moment reached its climax when Gabriella, like a judge and prosecutor in one person, asked the maid who should be punished for what she had done. In response, the maid, realizing the depth of her predicament and the possible consequences of her actions, hastened to declare that she could remedy the situation and put all the pearls back in their proper place, thus seeking to avoid the wrath of her mistress. Gabriella's demand to fall prostrate before her was fulfilled instantly, as if a bolt of lightning pierced the atmosphere in the room, highlighting the hierarchy and power she held in her hands. The servant girl knelt down and became the epitome of submission and fear of her mistress's unpredictable will. Noting her insolence, Gabriella forced her forehead to the floor, bringing the situation to a climax of humiliation, at which point the maid, already stripped of all pride and hope of leniency, begged for mercy. Graciously, but with an explicit condition, Gabriella offered the maid a path to redemption. She promised to spare her if the maid would be faithful and fulfill the important errand of taking her to Ernst. Otherwise, prison awaited her, a place where mercy and the hope of forgiveness seemed unattainable mirages. The maid, realizing that she faced a choice between faithful service and the grim uncertainty of the dungeon, agreed without hesitation to comply with Gabriella's demand. Concluding this episode of unprecedented dramatic intensity, Gabriella stroked the maid's head affectionately, as if in a gesture of forgiveness and recognition of her future service. This gesture was undoubtedly filled with deep meaning. On the one hand, it symbolized the restoration of trust and willingness to give a second chance, and on the other hand, it was a reminder that Gabriella's mercy and forgiveness were not unlimited, and every subsequent action would be under her watchful eye. At that decisive moment, when Gabriella's future hung in the balance, the atmosphere was filled with tension, as if before a storm that threatened to break at any moment. She stood beside Ernst, who was to be her companion on the journey ahead, as she prepared for the next stage of her journey. Nearby was also her brother, Tudwig Freiken Isodium, whose actions and look seemed like a good-natured farewell, but behind that mask lurked something much darker. Gabriella reciprocated, maintaining a semblance of benevolence. But, in her heart, she had a very different feeling. She saw Tudwig as nothing more than a malevolent creature who, despite her bloodline, had brought her to the brink of death, causing her impending rebirth into Fiona. This act of betrayal left a deep wound in her soul, leaving an unhealing mark of deceit and betrayal. Tudwig, that insidious architect of her downfall, had no intention of accompanying Gabriella to her new life as Fiona. In his place, a third prince, Johannes Memel Isodium, whose presence promised new challenges, would make the journey. Johannes, although part of the royal family, never had warm feelings for Fiona. His participation in their shared journey promised to add tension to Gabriella's already challenging journey of rebirth. These moments of goodbye and betrayal, filled with hidden resentments and unspoken secrets, became a flashpoint in Gabriella's story. Before her stood a road full of uncharted dangers and secret promises, where every step could mean both a new discovery and a new challenge. But despite all the challenges ahead, she was ready to face her destiny, to find her true purpose, and perhaps a path to redemption. Tudwig, skillfully disguising his true intentions under a mask of concern and brotherly love, pretended to care about Gabriella's fate. He, with a smile on his face, appealed to her to remember to write letters to keep in touch from a distance. Gabriella, responding to his request, suddenly addressed herself in the third person. It was an unwitting testament to how deeply Tudwig had managed to penetrate her mind, forcing her to adopt his looks and mannerisms. That fleeting mistake gave her a goosebumpy feeling as she realized his manipulative influence. Standing before the assembled aristocrats, however, Gabriella suddenly decided to use this moment to her advantage. She turned to Tudwig with gratitude, claiming that without his intervention she would never have ended up with Ernst, thus emphasizing her gratitude for indirectly influencing fate. Then, turning elegantly to better display her dress, Gabriella hoped that the aristocrats present would pay attention to the details of her outfit. Her cunning plan succeeded when the aristocrats noticed that the pearls on Gabriella's dress did not shimmer in the light the way real pearls do. This observation led them to conclude that Tudwig had probably decided to save money on a dress for his sister by choosing fake jewelry instead of real jewelry. Such an act of his brother, shown at this moment in front of the entire high society, not only emphasized his greed and cowardice, but also unwittingly made him look bad in front of the gathered elite, confirming the rumors about his unworthy behavior and attitude towards his own sister. While society cruelly mocked Tudwig, leaving him at a loss without the slightest clue as to how he should handle the situation, anxiety was brewing in Gabriella's mind over the absence of a second prince. Her heart hammered in anticipation of the meeting, her body trembling at the mere thought of him, for she could feel how in Fiona's previous body, every cell was filled with nothing but terror at the thought of him. Gabriella was gripped with anxiety, pondering how her new body would react to the second prince's personal presence, for the previous memories were so heavy that it was agonizing to even imagine the meeting. Suddenly, she noticed that Ernst was looking at her briefly, clearly concerned about her condition. Meanwhile, Tudwig, absorbed in solving the mystery of the false pearls, was confronted with an unexpected suggestion from the butler, who believed that the maids were most likely behind the switch. This assumption made Tudwig look at the situation from a different angle. In the midst of these events, Gabriella, trying to find a solution to the problem at hand, suggested that Tudwig take the maid Sonia with him to resolve the situation. Her offer sounded aloud like a plea for help that might shed light on solving the mysteries at hand. Tudwig, who was seething with barely contained rage, responded to her request. His response was infused with a hidden anger that underscored the tension of the moment. He realized that every decision he made could have far-reaching consequences, and there were difficult choices to be made. There was not only resentment for the innocent in his voice, but also the weight of impending decisions that could change the course of history. Despite the physical pain and underlying longing that was tearing at Gabriella's heart, she realized she had to keep her outward composure and even smile. After all, she was tasked with starring in a performance that had not yet begun. At that moment, like a whirlwind, Ernst burst into her destiny like a storm sweeping away everything in its path. With a decisive gesture, he removed Tudwig's arm from her shoulder, asserting his rights and duties as a future husband. Ernst, assuming the role of protector and protector, said with confidence that he would now be the one to take care of Gabriella, emphasizing his desire to be a support for her in their upcoming journey together. And here they are, holding hands, heading towards the waiting carriage to set off towards a new chapter in their lives, their wedding. This moment was full of symbolism, a departure from the past, represented by Tudwig, and a step into a future that promises to be full of new challenges and perhaps joys. But for Gabriella, every step toward the carriage was filled not only with anticipation of the wedding celebration, but also with thoughts of what lay ahead in her life with the man who had so strongly asserted his right to care for her. The moment the wheels of the carriage softly touched the sidewalk, Gabriella's heart beat faster. Her thoughts were full of anxiety and hope at the same time. She remembered her past life, where Ernst had been her companion, and now that death seemed only a distant memory, the prospect of being near him again filled her with both joy and fear. Gabriella couldn't share the truth about her past and her present self with Ernst, afraid it sounded too unbelievable even for a world full of wonders. When the two of them got into the carriage, Gabriella felt a kind of relief. Ernst could have chosen another way, to take a separate carriage, but he had stayed with her. This decision had not been accidental. Gabriella realized that Ernst may have intuitively sensed the threats that might be lurking over her. Thus, Ernst, even without realizing the depth of the situation, sought to protect her, to be there for her and shield her from possible trouble. It was the act of a true gentleman and faithful companion who wanted only the welfare of one whom he was perhaps beginning to regard as his wife again. With a soft creak and a smooth motion, the carriage touched down, setting a course towards their next adventure. The wheels slowly rolled over the rocky road, creating a rhythmic sound that accompanied their journey. There was something peaceful, but at the same time, exciting, as each turn of the wheels took them further away from the past and closer to a future Gabriella could only dream of. The moment Gabriella's gaze slid across the surface of the mirror, she felt the shiver of unaccustomedness before her reflection again. This new body, once again wrapped in youth and beauty, seemed something foreign and yet familiar to her. With each glance in the mirror, she tried to find those threads of memory in her features that would connect her to the past. But now, faced with her own reflection, she suddenly realized the depth of the change that had happened to her. She was stunned and at the same time mesmerized by the way time and fate had played with her, turning her into a being capable of starting over. Wondering about her ability to maintain her mask of innocence, Gabriella couldn't help but worry about how long she would be able to maintain her new role. She realized that each day of pretending added new challenges and questions to her life that she had to find answers to. Her thoughts suddenly turned to wondering who could have caused her previous death. Gabriella analyzed the circumstances, going over faces and motives in her mind, and her gaze stopped on Tudwig. He, with his inexhaustible thirst for power and political ambition, seemed the most likely candidate to be her assassin. But in the back of her mind, she knew not to rule out other contenders, including the second prince, whose motives could be just as strong and dangerous. These musings on conspiracies and secret enemies only added to Gabriella's thrill. For now, back to life in a new guise, she was determined to unravel the tangle of intrigue in which she had been involved before, and to uncover the truth behind her death. Gabriella, immersed in her musings, pondered the strange journey that had brought her to the future, rather than sending her back to the past, where she could try to right the wrongs she had done. Her thoughts involuntarily returned to the moment when, in an attempt to save Ernst's family heirloom from imminent loss, she had swallowed it. Could it be that this very action was the key to her incredible rebirth? Perhaps therein lies the answer to the question of why she traveled through time in this manner. However, Gabriella did not focus on that. She decided that whatever the reasons and circumstances of her return, her main goal was to stay alive and build a desirable future with Ernst. She wanted to believe that she could find a way to explain her appearance, her new destiny, and that Ernst would understand and accept her. If only she could open up to him, share her story, perhaps all their misunderstandings would disappear like fog in front of a bright sun. But Ernst, sitting across from her, seemed so far away. This strange feeling of separation, despite the physical proximity, was created by some unknown magical influence, as if invisible charms were pulling a chasm between them, which was beyond her power to overcome. That invisible wall between them reminded Gabriella of the depth and complexity of the task before her. She realized that in order to reconnect their destinies with Ernst, she would have to find a way to break down the magical barriers separating their hearts. And in this struggle for her place in the new world, for the right to happiness and love, Gabriella was ready to face any trials that could meet on her way. Gabriella, sitting on the soft velvet of the carriage cushion, looked through the glass window, and at that moment she was transported back in time to one of those carefree days that had already seemed to her only sweet dreams. She remembered the warm night that had enveloped her and Ernst as he had swept her up in his strong arms, laughing, and carried her across the cooled sand of the beach under an endless, starry sky. That night was filled with the magic of unspoken feelings, and the sea breeze caressed their skin as if trying to steal a moment for eternity. At that moment, Gabriella, on an impulse of the heart, confessed her love to Ernst, the words lying between them with the light rustle of the surf. But Ernst did not answer, leaving them both in a languor of unspokenness, where only each other's breathing filled the space around them with warm agreement. A lot had changed since then, and now, reflecting on the past, Gabriella realized it was time to find her way back to those days of pure, unadulterated joy and freedom. She decided she could no longer live in the shadows of default, hiding her inner rebirth from Ernst. Reflecting on the shackles she had placed on herself, told her that it was time to free herself from them in order to find her voice again. That word, shackles, flashed through her mind. Not just as a metaphor for her inner fears and doubts, but as a clue that might shed light on the path to her mental rebirth. She realized that only complete liberation from these invisible chains would allow her to find harmony and happiness in her life again, and perhaps to regain her lost love. In the novella, where Ingrid's fate was sealed within the strict framework of predestination, she faced the invisible but tangible fetters imposed on her by fate itself. These shackles defined the boundaries of her existence within the world she had been placed in, not of her own free will. The role Ingrid had to fulfill was both a test and a punishment for her at the same time, because it was predestined to her from above, almost like a divine intervention in her life path. Ingrid's fate became entangled in a tangle of destinies and trials, for the resolution of which she could only turn to the Book of Characters. This ancient folio contained the keys to understanding how each character could overcome their trials and free themselves from the invisible chains that bound their fate. However, fate did not grant freedom easily. It required total immersion in his role, total commitment, and perhaps sacrifice. Ingrid realized that any refusal to play by the rules set by unknowable forces would mean eternal captivity to those very same shackles, preventing the spell from resolving and freeing her. This story was not just a story about the search for freedom, it was a deep reflection on the meaning of destiny, on how the subtle threads of fate are woven into each person's life path, and on how important it is to find the strength to accept and fulfill the role that the world has prepared just for you. Ingrid, standing on the threshold of her trial, had to not only uncover the secrets hidden in the book, but also go through the trials while maintaining faith in herself and her ability to change her destiny. The moment Gabriella realized the magnitude of the trials facing her on her path to liberation, her resolve only strengthened. She realized that she should follow Ingrid's example of incarnating herself as a character in her new world. Gabriella decided that she would portray herself as virtuous and bright, even though every gesture and word filled with artificial kindness was difficult for her. But Gabriella's motivation was unyielding. She burned with the desire to reunite with Ernst and bring back her friends. Her love for Ernst was the invisible force that fueled her will to act and drove her to make the most incredible sacrifices. While trying to find an approach to Ernst, she noticed his aloof behavior. There wasn't the same warmth in his eyes. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, seeing only Fiona in her, a woman who for a moment was a stranger to him. Gabriella couldn't help but notice how much Ernst had changed, his coldness striking her to the core. She wondered if she could rekindle the former flame of love and trust in his heart. A sudden burst of laughter interrupted her musings, Gabriella trying to hide her inner struggle and confusion. She turned to Ernst with a flippant question about the reasons for his coldness toward her spouse. This sudden burst of emotion caused an awkwardness in the atmosphere, visibly affecting Ernst, who had not expected such a turn. Their interaction made the air freeze for a moment, filling it with a heavy expectation of a response. Suddenly, breaking the veil of awkwardness, Ernst asked Gabriella a penetrating question regarding past events with Tudwig, wondering if her act had been intentional. Gabriella acknowledged her actions without evasion. In response, Ernst, with an icy note in his voice, expressed his opinion that the result was not worth the cost, emphasizing the pointlessness and danger of such a risk. This moment revealed to Gabriella the depth of the complexity of their relationship, where every word and action was weighed on the scales of betrayal and trust. Gabriella, realizing the situation, remembered that Ernst had agreed to marry Fiona, believing her to be insufficiently intelligent to harm his native north. This knowledge inspired Gabriella's decision to continue playing a game in which she had to pretend to be less intelligent than she really was. But wanting to add spice to their interaction, and at the same time test the limits of her influence on Ernst, she decided to introduce an element of playfulness by complaining about the corset under her dress being too tight. Ernst, without losing his inherent rationality, offered to stop the carriage so that Gabriella could remove her discomfort. Gabriella, however, going further in her game, leaned toward him, asking him personally to loosen the corset. This act added a new intrigue to their relationship, bringing an element of personal and intimate interaction between them that was so unexpected that for a moment it questioned the boundaries established between them. The moment Ernst felt the tension constricting the air between them, he decided, with dignity, but also with a sense of inevitability, to summon the maid to his aid. This decision made Gabrielle feel a rush of disappointment. Her heart was full of hope that she might remove the dress and thus, as she had dreamed, allow Ernst to see beyond Fiona's appearance to her true self. Gabriella kept a secret dream that, penetrating deeper, Ernst would be able to see in her none other than the true beloved, despite all the disguises and obstacles erected by fate. However, she felt no anger toward Ernst for his unresolved doubt. After all, Gabriella realized that the task of knowing a man after his rebirth seemed more than impossible. It was like trying to unravel mysteries lost to the ages, especially since Ernst, for all his qualities, harbored a dislike for Fiona, remembering their confrontation on opposite sides of the barricades. But when Gabriella thought of her future residence in the east wing of the castle, a place reserved for guests whose presence was seen as a necessity rather than a joy, her disappointment was replaced by determination. There was more to it than just coexistence under the same roof. They were to become husband and wife, to join their destinies forever. Her heart was again filled with an unshakable determination to prove to Ernst that she was the one and only, whom he must know and love anew, regardless of all the circumstances that separated their worlds. At a temporary rest stop, away from the hustle and bustle of constant traffic, Ernst found privacy in his tent to attend to urgent business. At this moment, Sebastian Dessen, his indispensable assistant, endowed with both loyalty and competence, entered without warning. With unpretended relief in his voice, Sebastian reported that the important cargo had been successfully delivered to its destination by ship. This transportation was of weighty importance, not only to the military strategies of their side, but also concerned the interests of the civilians who were unwilling witnesses to the great political upheaval associated with the overthrow of the first prince, an event Ernst aspired to, viewing his future marriage to Fiona as a step toward that goal. But the serious conversation was suddenly interrupted by an unexpected incident. Ernst choked, which made him lose for a moment the importance of the moment. With mild irritation, he commented on Sebastian's tea-making skills, hinting that he had never been able to master this simple art. Sebastian, not at a loss, wittily parried, asserting that still his skill was superior to Gabriella's in the matter, suddenly recalling the approaching anniversary of her death. This turn of conversation instantly enveloped them both in a blanket of sadness, for Gabriella was a person whose loss had left an indelible mark in the hearts of all who knew her. Not only Ernst, but all the people of the North respected and loved her for her nobility, courage, and unwavering adherence to her principles. In the silence of the tent, amidst the flashes of memories and shadows of a life gone by, both men allowed themselves for a moment to be distracted from the incessant business of honoring the woman who had left an indelible mark on their hearts. Ernst, immersed in the sea of his reflections, could not help but sigh heavily when the face of Gabriella, the woman who had left an indelible mark on his heart, surfaced in his mind. In the same stream of recollections, there was also a reflection on Fiona, on how little harm she could do to the world around her, thanks to her extraordinary kindness, her hardships, and her rather simple-mindedness. Her tendency to sleepwalk only added a touch of melancholy to the picture. For Ernst, marrying Fiona was far from a show of love, but rather a gesture of revenge against Tudwig, who had caused Gabriella's death. However, now that fate had brought them together, Ernst was determined to surround Fiona with care and protection as if she were his little sister, despite all the reasons for their union. Lately, a vague premonition had begun to visit him that Fiona was not as simple as she seemed at first glance, and there was a depth to her that the rumors did not know. Suddenly, their musings were interrupted by the hasty entrance of one of the knights, whose concern was written right on his face. Sebastian, Ernst's closest friend and associate, had not hesitated to take over, thus allowing Ernst to remain calm and focused on what lay ahead. Before leaving, Sebastian couldn't resist making a joke, reminding Ernst that tonight was his first wedding night. This lighthearted comment dissipated the tense atmosphere somewhat, while reminding him of the importance of the moment that awaited Ernst. Ernst, overwhelmed by the weight of his worries, sank doomedly into a chair, as if trying to rest from the burden of the difficult reflections that had been heaped upon his shoulders. Gabriella's shadow hovered in his thoughts, and he couldn't get rid of the thought that she would be extremely disappointed in him if she knew the motives behind his marriage. Ernst did not marry for love, but as a shrewd move to allow him to move freely through the southern lands and remain in close proximity to Tudwig, his nemesis behind Gabriella's death. Time flowed inexorably, but after 6 long years, the memory of Gabriella never faded in his heart. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt the sharp pain of realizing his inability to protect her. This weight of guilt weighed on his soul, reminding him painfully every time the memory of the tragedy came to his mind. In spite of all the haste with which he rushed to her after reading her last letter, he was not in time. He was still painfully going over every tiny detail of that terrible night in his mind, endlessly returning to the scene of her death, as if trying to reconstruct what had happened and find a way to undo the past. A promise lived in his heart, a promise to take the life of anyone who was involved in her death. At such a moment, while Ernst was absorbed in his gloomy reflections, Gabriella entered the tent quietly. Her appearance was a sudden light in the darkness of his despair, a reminder that life goes on, even when there seemed to be only room in his heart for pain and sorrow. Only a few moments ago, in the back of her mind, Gabriella had been convinced that the idea of romance in an arranged marriage seemed something impossible, even absurd. She couldn't deny the fact that she was flattered by Ernst's attention, by his ability to ignore the charms of the other women in their midst. However, it seemed that in light of his rebirth into a new body, this shield of indifference extended to her herself. It put her in a deadlock of feelings, causing her to oscillate between wanting to laugh at the absurdity of the situation and wanting to cry at the longing and uncertainty. Looking for a way out of this emotional loop, Gabriella decided to act. She summoned her faithful maid Sonia, a girl who was not only an au pair, but also a bridge between her and the rest of the world. "Find Ernst," she ordered, putting not only inquiry but quiet desperation into those words. Sonia, whose eyes reflected the depth of the situation, nodded and disappeared into the corridors of the huge house, clearly realizing that her speed and skill depended not only on the success of the mission, but also, perhaps, her own fate, because Gabriella had the power to change the lives of all those around her. When Gabriella finally found Ernst, her heart beat faster. She had been preparing for this meeting, imagining various scenarios, but what she saw took her by surprise. Ernst stood in front of her, and his gaze, full of disappointment, seemed to pierce through her. That expression spoke volumes, and Gabriella felt a swirl of emotions growing inside her, mixing both worry and hope that the next few moments would reveal the answers to the questions that plagued her. The moment Gabriella noticed the cups on the table by Ernstum, an epiphany struck her. The tea that Sebastian usually gave him served not only as a thirst-quenching drink, but also as a kind of barometer of Ernst's mood. Her offer to make the tea herself was instantly rejected, but Gabriella didn't give up. She decided to play on feelings, not shying away from resorting to dramatization, expressing that she felt like an outcast whose presence only served to irritate those around her. The world seemed to stop waiting for Ernst's reaction, the silence around them becoming almost tangible, as if a loud echo filled the space between them. At last, Ernst, yielding to the pressure of the moment, allowed her not only to make tea, but to enjoy it in the privacy of his tent, after which it was supposed she would leave his domain. When Gabriella began to brew the tea, her every move was knowing and confident. Ernst, an unwitting witness to this ritual, was seized with wonder. Watching her dexterity and skill with the tea utensils awoke in him memories of his dead wife, and curiosity flared up in his soul. Where did this woman get such amazing skills? Why does the simple act of brewing tea evoke such a flurry of emotions and memories? Suddenly, Ernst felt an irresistible urge to join her, to sit beside her and taste for himself the tea she brewed with such skill. This decision seemed to come to him on its own, pushed by an unknown force, a desire to know more about Gabriella, about her past that was so closely intertwined with his own memories and losses. The moment Gabriella met Ernst, enveloping him with her warm presence, the atmosphere in the tent was immediately filled with a sense of coziness and warmth. Ernst, whose gaze was fixed on the cup of fragrant tea, could not conceal his surprise and deep excitement. As soon as he touched his lips to the hot drink, he was overcome with a sharp sense of nostalgia. The flavor of the tea was strikingly identical to the one his late wife had once made. It was the very flavor he longed for, a flavor that held many warm memories and moments of happiness. Gabriella, noticing his reaction and his desire to immerse himself in memories, slyly suggested adding some honey to the tea to enhance its flavor. The offer was not just a gesture of hospitality, but a hint, a cryptic signal of her possible rebirth. She caught the moment when Ernst had finished his tea, which was a kind of condition of their tacit agreement, and left the tent with dignity, leaving him in thought. Left alone, Ernst could not get rid of his intrusive thoughts. He wondered whether all girls really preferred tea with honey, or whether this was a tactic on the part of his new wife. Deep down, he realized that his attraction to her was due not only to her personal qualities, but also to her ability to remind him of the dead Gabriella. In this sea of doubt and reflection, Ernst came to an unexpected decision. Instead of secluding her in the East Wing, he wanted to move her closer to him so that he could observe her more closely and try to unravel the mystery of her true nature. This decision opened a new page in their relationship, filled with expectations and mysteries to be solved. There was a clause in his and Gabriella's prenuptial agreement stating that they were forbidden to fall in love with each other. However, seeing her smile, his heart began to race, causing him to break the most unfair pact of his life. The passion that enveloped Ernst at the thought of Gabriella was truly boundless. His heart was filled with an uncontrollable attraction to her. Every aspect of her essence seemed like a miracle he was lucky enough to find in this chaotic world. When he finally wrapped her in his arms, a certainty ignited in his soul. She was the only one he needed, the last chapter in the book of his life that he wished to write only with her. Now, in the face of Fiona, whose presence was causing similarly powerful waves of feeling in his heart, he felt the need to unravel the mystery of her attraction, endeavoring to discover whether this feeling carried the same charge of sincerity and passion that he had felt for Gabriella. The next day, when Gabriella stepped over the threshold at that clear evening hour, she was confronted with a scene that might have seemed idyllic had it not been for the tension hidden in it. The knights gathered around the campfire enjoyed dinner in an atmosphere of camaraderie. However, upon seeing Gabriella, their mood instantly changed to hostile, forcing her to leave the place. The incident made Gabriella wonder why the prince, whose protection had always been a reliable shield, had not sent his guards with her this time. Despite all the potential risks, this act of the prince endowed her with unexpected freedom, gave her the opportunity to explore the world around her from a new, unexplored side. But at the same time, Gabriella was seized by an incomprehensible feeling, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation of something great, a moment when every rustle and glance seemed a harbinger of inevitable change. The feeling was a complex cocktail of emotions, where excitement was intertwined with anticipation, creating an ineffable atmosphere of foreboding and uncertainty, in which Gabriella found both an unsettling uneasiness and an exciting freedom of choice. When coughs and wheezing sounded in the scene, the air was filled with anxiety. Gabriella, whose heart was full of concern for her protectors, could not bear to see them suffer. In an effort to alleviate their affliction, she decided to take matters into her own hands, for caring for her neighbor was not just a duty for her, but an expression of sincere devotion. Inspired by her determination to help, she prepared a healing tea, fragrant and hot, laced with honey, which is known to have the power to heal. The knights, however, showed a sudden distrust of the drink offered by Gabriella. Perhaps fear of the unknown or doubts about unorthodox treatments made them hesitate. They exchanged hesitant glances as if waiting to see who would be the first to take a sip. The maid Sophia, watching what was happening, could not refrain from a flash of irritation. Her voice cut through the tension-filled air as she began to talk about the difficulties of making such tea. Sophia's desire to emphasize the effort expended in sourcing and preparing rare and precious ingredients was so sincere and powerful that the knights could not remain indifferent to her words. They realized that every ingredient had been obtained by extraordinary effort, and that behind it was the care and devotion of those who wished them nothing but health. Eventually, the realization that Gabriella and Sophia were acting in good faith made the knights overcome their distrust. Cautiously, with some uncertainty as to whether the cup held any danger, one by one they began to taste the tea. A shadow of doubt still lingered in their hearts, but the desire for relief and faith in the good intentions of those who cared for them eventually outweighed them. At the moment when the knights, surprised to taste the unique flavor of tea prepared by Gabriella, lined up neatly in front of the flaming cauldron as if by magic call, the atmosphere was filled with something magical. Sophia, not hiding her anger, loudly declared that such a miracle deserved sincere words of gratitude. Her call resonated in the hearts of the warriors, and united by a common wave of appreciation, they unanimously expressed their gratitude to Gabriella. In that moment, enveloped by the warmth of their words, Gabriella felt something deep and thoughtful. She imagined how she might have acted in the past, in another life, where her heart was closed to feelings, and she lived in detachment from the world. The meeting with Ernst was a turning point in her life. The moment when a sincere feeling flared up in her soul, so bright and strong that she found in herself not the strength to admit it for fear of losing her beloved. This fear of loss that she had felt toward Ernst suddenly found an echo in her relationship with the knights as well. Even knowing that her feelings might not be accepted, for in their eyes she was not yet a true duchess, she kept her distance for fear of rejection. But now, as she watched the knights, oblivious to their ailments and surrounding the bonfire, radiate genuine gratitude and warmth, Gabriella acutely realized the depth of her mistake. It became clear to her that by not sharing her feelings with Ernst fully and sincerely, she had missed an opportunity to grow even closer to him, just as she had with the knights, who now looked at her with genuine respect and acceptance. In the flickering light of the fire, amidst the harmony of conversation and the whisper of the flames, Gabriella beheld among the gathered knights a figure that made her heart skip a beat. It was Christian Bellemare, a young man she had last seen when he was only 17 years old. He was one of the few people whose memory warmed her heart as much as the memories of Ernst. Making her way through the crowd of knights, she decided to take a seat next to Christian, but his reaction was not at all what she expected. Through the murmur of the evening, his words, full of animosity, came to her, urging her to stop following them and return to the carriage. This moment was a cold shower for Gabriella, as she realized that gaining Christian's trust would not be an easy task. Without giving up, Gabriella addressed him using his last name, which made the young man freeze in bewilderment. He couldn't understand how she could know such details about him. Without wasting a second, Gabriella continued in his direction, leaving behind words full of reproach for his unwillingness to acknowledge her. As she walked by, she couldn't help but notice his genuine bewilderment. Her heart flashed back to a past life when she'd loved to tease him, watching his reactions. Now, sitting next to him by the fire, Gabriella allowed herself to savor this moment anew, remembering the joys of earlier days, when each of their meetings had been filled with genuine fun and easy companionship. In the depths of her thoughts, Gabriella was running scenarios in her head of possible developments in which Christian played a key role. She was convinced that if he remained the same person he was, then no doubt he couldn't get past the current situation without paying attention. She supposed that Christian was bound to ponder the possible threat she might pose. That would lead him to start watching her closely. This was the outcome Gabriella desired, for while under Christian's gaze, she could hope that he would recognize her in Sophia's body as his former mistress, whom he had followed relentlessly in the past. Gabriella reflected on the fact that even if her plan wasn't as effective as she hoped, she would still be in a winning position. For hidden in her face is not only Princess Sophia, but also the newly minted Duchess of the Northlands. She was to regain her lost influence and revive the former love and devotion of her subjects. Gabriella realized that the road to regaining her position would be thorny and full of challenges, but she was prepared to face these challenges head-on, for at stake was not only her personal future, but also the well-being of those she considered her subjects. In her heart lived the hope that wit and endurance would help her overcome all obstacles to revive her name and regain her lost power. As soon as the first rays of the morning sun touched the ground, the tranquility of the morning for Gabriella was broken by an unexpected awakening. The events of the last few days, when the forces of the North and South had joined forces, had already hinted at a riot brewing, and Gabriella, with her inside knowledge, had been expecting a possible riot. But being awakened so early clearly foreshadowed something unusual. Gahan, the man whose duties included overseeing the loading of provisions, appeared before Gabriella. His words were full of indignation. He claimed that the Northerners apparently lacked the skill for such a responsible job as loading provisions onto ships. Gahan insisted that Northerners should not be entrusted with this kind of task in the future. Gabriella, for her part, was well aware of Gahan's true motives. He wished to see the Northmen begging for food, which was part of a larger game of power and control. Gabriella saw a hidden opportunity in this conversation. Realizing that Gahan and his kind were expecting a certain reaction from her, she decided to act unconventionally. Gabriella left the room, carefully maintaining a nonchalant look and pretending as if she didn't realize the depth and importance of the current moment. Her behavior was calculated. She wanted to show that she was not giving in to provocation and was playing by her own rules. This moment was a testament to her cunning and ability to use the situation to her advantage, despite the seeming simplicity of what was happening. Gabriella knew that her every action, every gesture, and word could play a decisive role in future events, in which power, manipulation, and personal interests were woven into a single pattern of a complex political game. Suddenly, amidst the tense atmosphere in the room, Gahan made a statement that was strikingly unexpected. Gabriella, in his opinion, was too young to delve into the complexities of the issues at stake. Gabriella, however, was not indebted. With feigned naivety, but with a spark of steadfastness in her eyes, she replied that Gahan's words sounded like an insult to her husband's army, and an insult uttered under the pretext of defending the emperor's honor. With surprise and undisguised indignation in her voice, Gabriella added that she had never before met such a careless and thoughtless man. Gahan, for his part, could not contain his emotions and shouted angrily, trying to emphasize his high origin and proximity to the imperial family by claiming to be related to the emperor himself. But Gabriella, imperturbably and with dignity, told him to leave the grounds of her carriage, warning him that her brother, on hearing of the incident, would be furious at the words he had heard. Meanwhile, Christian, who had witnessed the whole conversation, watched with deep disappointment. The scene that unfolded before his eyes was like a poorly acted drama, causing his soul to feel sadness rather than approval. But then came a turn that no one could have foreseen. Suddenly, in a decision that seemed as unexpected as the previous accusations, Gabriella declared one of Gahan's men in charge of provisions, effectively removing Gahan from all previous authority. This decision, like lightning, struck everyone present, because Gahan, who just a moment ago was at the center of the scandal, was now deprived of a very important position, which caused a lot of questions and assumptions about the further motives and development of events. After the appointment of a random man to replace Gahan as chief of provisions, the tension in the air did not subside, but instead took on a new manifestation. A fierce argument broke out between Gahan and the newly elected manager, which, to the surprise of everyone present, turned into a real fight. This clash, full of tension and unexpected twists and turns, was the culmination of the passions ignited. Gabriella, for her part, made no secret of the satisfaction of her victory over Gahan, as she watched the chaos she had indirectly instigated. In the midst of these events, Gabriella was approached by Sebastian, whose appearance was unexpected but very timely. He had come to greet her, and seeing the mess that had been made, he decided to offer his help in resolving the situation. Gabriella, pondering Sebastian's suggestion, wondered how long he had been watching the unfolding events without interfering. As they were discussing possible ways to resolve the conflict, Ernst approached them, his gaze expressing disapproval of what was happening. With dignity and some severity, he remarked that a fight was a very improper sight for a lady, emphasizing his opinion of the inconsistency of what was going on with high standards of public behavior. Gabriella, in an effort to soften the situation, nonchalantly replied that she was already protected by the knights, trying to convince Ernst that everything was under control and there was no cause for concern. It was clear from the look on Ernst's face, however, that he was well aware that the knights had arrived after the fight had begun, and Gabriella's attempt to convince him otherwise was unconvincing. This moment revealed not only the tension between the characters, but also the depth of untold thoughts and feelings hidden behind outward calm and confidence. At the moment when the tension was at its height, Ernst, feeling a deep affection for Gabriella and wishing to protect her from any threats, decided to take her away from the place where the quarrel was breaking out. His motives were pure, based on a desire to protect her from unforeseen circumstances that might arise during the conflict. But Gabriella, steadfast and unwavering as a true northerner, was unwilling to leave the scene. Her determination to stand up for her men, showing unswerving loyalty and priority in protecting the interests of the Northmen, left Ernst unmoved. Sensing the gravity of the moment, Ernst, in full earnestness and realizing the depth of the problem, took the significant step of ordering Gahan to be dismissed along with all his men. This decision was not an easy one for him, for such a gesture had far-reaching consequences. However, he couldn't ignore Gabriella's feelings and her desire to stand up for her own. At the same time, Ernst did not miss the opportunity to express his disagreement with her methods, pointing out that taking the situation to the extreme was unnecessary. His words reflected care, but also an inevitable concern for the consequences of her decisions. The situation escalated when Ernst, succumbing to a surge of emotion, walked abruptly toward Gabriella. His movements were quick and decisive, causing Gabriella to react instantly. A slight panic flashed in her eyes, for this behavior was unexpected. She, like any other person out of her comfort zone, was suddenly startled by the unpredictability of the moment. Sophia's sudden shriek broke the silence, drawing the attention of everyone present. She swept over Gahan like a whirlwind, demanding the immediate return of Gabriella's emerald hairpin. This one wasn't just a piece of jewelry, but a symbol of the innocent bargain made between her and Gahan when she traded it for a jar of honey to treat the soldiers with yesterday. The soldiers, after witnessing this charge, were astonished to the core. They could not believe that they were drinking tea flavored with such an expensive ingredient. This act of kindness and generosity on Sophia's part opened their eyes to her true heart, and at the same time revealed the true face of Gahan, devoid of compassion and honor. Realizing the trust and hope they had placed in Gahan, and how easily he had betrayed that for his own gain, caused the soldiers previously willing to protect him to now turn away, leaving him alone to face the consequences of his actions. Ernst, who witnessed the revelation and given the gravity of the crime, did not hesitate to pass judgment. Gahan was condemned to execution, a decision that epitomized a harsh but just retribution for his treachery and greed. It was a moment when justice was served, leaving behind a lesson about the importance of honor and trust in the hearts of those who witnessed these events. Ernst, displaying the nobility of his character, missed no opportunity to express his gratitude to Gabriella for her invaluable contribution to the morale of his soldiers. He confidently pledged his support to her in any endeavor, even though her identity remained a mystery to him, her true face hidden behind a curtain of secrecy that only added to the intrigue of their interaction. In time, in one of his reflections, Ernst shared with Sebastian his observations regarding the unusually warm feelings his soldiers had for Gabriella. He couldn't help but notice that it had all started with a simple gesture, the tea she offered them. Ernst, with a slight chuckle, pointed out that even Sebastian seemed to have succumbed to her unknown charm, to which the latter only smiled embarrassedly, finding no words to defend himself. Unexpectedly, their conversation was interrupted by the loud exclamations of Sophia, who announced a new concern from the threshold. Gabriella, apparently exhausted after all her exertions, was trying to keep her privacy from the intrusive attention of the soldiers who had gathered around her carriage. These soldiers, moved by concern and gratitude, could not afford to retreat, fearing that Gabriella, having been reclusive for so long, might need their help. This event emphasized not only their genuine care and appreciation for Gabriella, but also the complexity of their relationship, where the lines between privacy and obligation, care and intrusiveness became increasingly blurred. In the depths of his soul, Ernst kept a heavy attachment to the memories of his dead wife, believing that his heart would forever remain closed to his new love. However, when confronted with the inescapable attraction and unfathomable mystery that was Gabriella, he felt that perhaps it was with her that he would have a chance to open his heart to warm feelings again. Approaching Gabriella's carriage, Ernst did not expect that fate would give him such an unexpected sign. Gabriella, as if pushed by a force that sought to unite them, clumsily fell out of the carriage straight into his arms. This moment, filled with surprise and warmth, seemed preordained by fate. The scent emanating from Gabriella seemed unusually familiar to Ernst, as if evoking memories of times forgotten and lost, but now revived in the face of a new opportunity. Allowing himself for a moment to forget the weight of the past, Ernst suggested to Gabriella a walk that might be the beginning of their new story. Walking side by side, they were enveloped in an atmosphere of mutual attention and restrained hope. Gabriella, confused by the unexpected turn of events, felt excitement and awe, mysteriously hoping that this moment would pave the way for something more, a deeper connection between them. As Ernst began to talk, however, his thoughts drifted to the future, not so much to their mutual, but to his duty to country and people. He divulged plans for a research unit which was supposed to be led by Gabrielle. This conversation carried many hopes and prospects for the common good, but to Gabriella, it sounded like a reminder that their possible personal relationship was still hidden beyond the boundaries of professional obligations and royal duties. Ernst shared with Gabriella a deeply personal and dark secret that had roamed the veins of his family for generations. He spoke of a mysterious and terrifying night sickness that had mercilessly stalked his clan. The disease not only threatened his own well-being, but also made him long for the future of all who stood under his protection. There was a note of despair in his voice as he confessed his hope of finding a cure through his research. He stood bowed before Gabriella, as if under the weight of the burden of hope he carried. With words imbued with sincerity and devotion, he assured her that he was willing to make any sacrifice to ensure the best possible conditions for her group. His request to Gabriella that she not expel anyone from their congregation reflected the depth of his concern for each of its members. Gabriella, for her part, felt a wave of reflection sweep over her mind. Since her death, which seemed like an eternity ago, Ernst had remained unchanged, loyal, determined, and willing to make any sacrifice for the good of the duchy. Her reflections on Ernst were imbued with respect and a deep understanding of the role he continued to fulfill. Watching his steadfastness and devotion to his duty, Gabriella realized that before her stood a man whose leadership and commitment to protecting his subjects left no room for doubt as to his true intentions. Ernst, despite personal trials and family curses, continued to be a stronghold for all in his care, demonstrating that true leadership is not tested through power, but through sacrifice and a willingness to stand up for the good of others. Suddenly, Gabriella felt an unknown force engulf her, causing unbearable pain, as if myriad strands of fire were mercilessly piercing her body from within. The sensation was so powerful and devastating that her consciousness left her body, plunging her into the abyss of fainting. In this state of pain and unconsciousness, time and space seemed to warp, leading her down a path of unexpected visions. When her eyes opened again, the world she saw was very different. Gabriella found herself in a lavishly decorated ducal bedroom where every object exuded the grandeur and warmth of home. Ernst was lying next to her like the embodiment of a dream, radiating pure joy and happiness. His voice, softly saying "Gabby," filled the space with a special warmth, creating the illusion of a carefree existence in which adversity seemed forgotten. Gabriella felt her lips respond to Ernst's, guided by an invisible force awakening long-forgotten emotions in her. As he pulled her to him, the world around him seemed to be bathed in a soft light, filling her heart with an unfathomable calm and comfort. However, upon noticing Sophia's pink hair, Gabriella found herself disoriented. The question of why she, while in Sophia's body, was perceived by Ernst as Gabriella made her heart sink in confusion. And then, as if the magical world created in the dream had dissipated, Gabrielle came to her senses again, finding herself lying alone in bed. The reality greeted her cold and unfriendly, in stark contrast to the warm illusion she had just experienced. Ernst was no longer beside her. Instead, Sophia was taking the place of a recent escort on her imaginary journey. This transition from dream world to reality filled Gabriella's heart with a sense of loss, leaving behind only echoes of questions and uncertainty about what was really true in this tangled weave of realities.